10 fates, every one of them preventable. Gundam has spent 45 years asking why humans choose war, and answering that question by destroying the people who had no choice. Here are the worst. Let's break this down. Bernie Wiseman. Bernie is not a soldier. He is a young Xeon mechanic who volunteers for a suicide mission because he wants to impress the people around him, and because nobody has told him yet that wanting to be brave and being effective at war are not the same thing. Mobile Suit. Gundam 0080. War in the Pocket is set during the 1-year war, and Bernie arrives in the neutral colony Side 6 on a mission to destroy the Federation's prototype Gundam before it can be deployed against Xeon. He fails his first attempt, gets shot down, and spends the middle of the series hiding and recovering with the help of a child named Al and a woman named Christina, who lives in the same building. The problem is that Christina is the pilot of the Gundam he is trying to destroy. Neither of them knows this about the other. They develop a friendship. Bernie and Al form a bond built around Al's romanticized idea of war as adventure. Bernie begins to understand war as attrition and waste and luck. When the mission is reinstated as a colony bombardment that will kill everyone in Side 6, Bernie attempts to destroy the Gundam himself to prevent it. A final act of genuine courage from someone who has been defined by inadequacy. He and Christina fight in their respective machines, neither knowing who the other is until Bernie's suit is destroyed. He dies. Al watches from the ground, and then the armistice is announced. The war ended before the battle. Bernie's death was unnecessary in every measurable sense. The colony would have survived. Christina would have survived. The only thing his death produced was the education of a child who will never think about war the same way again. That is Gundam 0080's argument about what war actually teaches people who are on the ground living in it. 4. Murasame. The Titans, the Earth Federation's internal security apparatus in Zeta Gundam, run a series of facilities called new type research labs, and what they do there is not research. They take people with new type potential and subject them to medical procedures, psychological conditioning, and neural modification until the person is replaced by something more useful. A pilot who responds to commands, interfaces with their mobile suit at an elevated level, and has had enough of their original personality dismantled that they do not resist the process. Fora Murasame is the 4th test subject to come through the Murasame Institute. She does not know her original name. She does not know where she came from. She is called 4 because she is the 4th, and the number is more convenient than a person. When Kamille Bidan meets her in Hong Kong, she is in a state of unstable calm. Capable of warmth in civilian environments, capable of violence in a cockpit, uncertain which version of herself is real. The two fall into a connection built on shared grievance. Kamille resents a world that has misunderstood him, and 4 has been structurally disassembled by that world's worst representatives. They fall in love in the space the war briefly makes available. The Titans retrieve 4, reactivate her conditioning, and deploy her against the same people she had been living alongside. When she finally breaks free and tries to escape, Jared Mesa kills her to prevent that escape. Not because she is a threat, but because she is a loose end. She dies protecting Kamille from the hit. Her final moments are clarity about what had been done to her. That clarity lasts approximately as long as the life that remained. Lalah Sune. The original. Char Aznabil finds Lalah in an Indian brothel, recognizes her new type potential, a heightened spatial and empathic awareness that makes her an exceptional pilot, and takes her into his care. The debt she feels for this shapes the rest of her short life. Char is not cruel to Lalah. He is worse than that. He is genuinely fond of her, in the way that men who treat people as instruments sometimes are. He places her in an experimental mobile armor called the Elmeth, which uses her new type ability to control remote weapons called funnels through psychic waves and deploys her in combat operations. Amuro Ray encounters her in battle. Two new types sense each other across the vacuum of space and recognize in each other something the war has not destroyed in them, a capacity for connection beyond normal human range. The franchise has spent decades debating whether what passes between them in those moments constitutes love, recognition, or simply the new type experience of encountering a mind that resonates at the same frequency. The debate is largely resolved by what happens next. Lalah interposes herself between Char's mobile suit and Amuro's killing blow, and is cut down by a man she was trying to save. Char never recovers from this. Amuro never recovers from this. The original rivalry that drives the entire Universal Century's emotional architecture, the 40-year war between Char Aznavour and Amuro Ray, runs on the fuel of a woman who died shielding a man who had trained her as a weapon and been reached by her as a person. Her death generates everything that follows. She is given nothing in return for it. Elpeo Ple. Children should not be soldiers. Gundam makes this argument more than once with more than one character, and each time the argument becomes more specific and more uncomfortable. Elpeo Ple is a cyber-Newtype child created by the Newtype lab system that also produced for Murasame, and where 4 was given a number because she was the 4th, Elpeo Ple has a name that was designed by the program, Twee, and diminutive, the name of a mascot rather than a person. She is introduced in Mobile Suit Gundam Zazed as an apparently cheerful, ice cream-obsessed girl who is also one of the most lethal mobile suit pilots in the Neo-Zeon military. The dissonance is intentional. She is a child who has been turned into a precision instrument and given the surface texture of a child to make her more manageable for the adults around her. She forms a genuine bond with Judao Ashti, the protagonist of ZZ, through the resonance of their respective Newtype abilities. She meets Ple 2, another clone, a later iteration of the same template, and the confrontation between original and copy exposes everything that has been done to both of them. Ple 2 is deployed to destroy Judao. Elpeo. Ple shields him. She is killed by the copy of herself. The copy then has to carry the weight of having killed the original. This is how the Newtype research programs generate loss, not just in the people they destroy directly, but in the specific cruelty of making their creations complicit in each other's destruction. Elpeo Ple does not get a soldier's death. She gets a child's death, protecting someone she loves from something the adults around her built. Rau Le Creuset. There is a version of the Seed tragedy where Rau Le Creuset is simply a villain, the masked antagonist who engineers catastrophe for nihilistic reasons, the obstacle Kira and Athrun must overcome. The show makes that reading available because it needs him to function as an antagonist. But his backstory removes the option of finding him convenient. Rau was born in Cosmic Era 43 as a clone of Aldeflaga, a coordinator who wanted to extend his own life by duplicating himself. The duplication was imperfect. The cloning process introduced a progressive cellular degeneration. Rau ages faster than a normal human, his body consuming itself at an accelerating rate, his lifespan measured not in decades but in years of increasing pain. His father, upon seeing that the clone was flawed, rejected him. Rau grew up knowing exactly what he was, knowing exactly why he had been made, knowing exactly that the man who made him found him worthless because the imitation was imperfect. He spent his life in a body that was literally dying from its own design flaw, building a philosophy around the conclusion that humanity was no different from what had been done to him. A species making copies of its own worst impulses, calling them progress, and discarding the results when they were inconvenient. He does not want victory. He wants everyone to understand what he knows about what life actually is. His death at Kira's hands does not feel like justice. It feels like confirmation of his thesis. The broken thing was eliminated by the thing that was built to eliminate it. Sergei Smirnov, the wild bear of Russia. Sergei Smirnov serves the Human Reform League in Mobile Suit Gundam 00 as a commander who is respected for competence and feared for effectiveness. A soldier's soldier who has given his adult life to military service and paid for it with the time he could not spend with his family. He has a son, Andre, who grew up with an absent father and interpreted that absence not as sacrifice but as abandonment. The gap between these two understandings, Sergei experiencing duty, Andre experiencing desertion, defines the fault line between them before anything else has happened. When the Earth Federation consolidates under the oppressive A-laws and Sergei, as a man of conscience, refuses to endorse what he recognizes as institutional brutality, he allies with the forces working against A-laws. Andre is an A-law soldier by this point, shaped by years of trying to earn approval from a father who was never present to give it. and has attached the legitimacy of his own identity to the organization his father is now opposing. The two meet in battle. Sergei, attempting to defect through combat, is identified by his own son. Andrei kills him. The moment Andrei realizes who he has killed produces a horror that the series does not resolve cleanly. Andrei survives, has to continue existing with the knowledge of what his unresolved resentment cost him, and the audience is given no comfortable place to put their response because the tragedy requires two understandable failures: a father who chose duty and a son who needed something duty does not provide. Marita Cruz. The franchise has returned to the story of Lalah Sune in different registers across 4 decades, but Marida Cruz is its darkest iteration. She is Pill 12, the 12th clone of Elpeo Ple, created for the Glemmy Toto Rebellion during the first Neo-Zeon War of Gundam Z's. 11 previous versions existed, most were killed in combat. When the rebellion collapsed, Ple 12 was 12 years old, alone, without a master, and without a framework for existing outside of military command. She was sold, the Gundam Unicorn. OVA does not allude what happened after that. She spent years as a sex slave, her reproductive organs eventually damaged beyond repair by the repeated forced abortions that the business required. She was discovered years later by Subaruwa Zinnerman during a law enforcement operation, barely functional, a person who had been used until the useful parts were gone. Zinnerman, a grieving father who saw in her the ghost of his dead daughter, took her in. He renamed her Marita Cruz. He gave her something that none of the people who made her had ever provided, a relationship defined by something other than utility. She calls him father by the end. She dies in a battle she enters to protect someone else, in an act of selflessness from a person who had spent her entire existence being defined by what others needed from her. The franchise uses her to close the loop on a horror it opened with Lalah, the cost of treating Newtype ability as a resource to be harvested, but the closing of that loop requires her to die, which is its own argument about how the system deals with its victims even when it is done with them. Orga Itsuka. The argument Orga Itsuka makes to Mikazuki August is the same argument every commander in every army in every conflict has made to every soldier in their command. Trust me, follow me, and I will make sure the sacrifice means something. Orga builds Tekkadan from the wreckage of a security company that treated child soldiers as disposable, and he is genuinely motivated by love for the people under his command. He wants to build something real, something that will outlast the war, something that justifies what the boys of Tekkadan have already paid in flesh and childhood. The tragedy of iron-blooded orphans is that the system does not negotiate with sincerity. Orga makes a series of decisions that compound, allying with McGillis Farid against Gjallarhorn's most powerful faction, betting the entire organization on a political gamble that collapses when McGillis is defeated, and the consequences fall on the children around him before they fall on him. When Orga's death arrives, it arrives the way institutional violence usually arrives. Not as a confrontation, not as a battle, but as an assassination in the street. He is shot multiple times while trying to walk away from the shooter. He does not fall immediately. He walks, bleeding, because he is trying to keep moving forward because that is the only behavior he has ever known. Because the only identity Orga has ever built is the one that keeps going for the sake of everyone behind him. He collapses in an alley. He dies alone. The boys who needed him to survive are left to navigate the collapse without him, and what Orga dies understanding, that the system was never going to let Tekkadan win, is the knowledge that the audience carries into every death that follows. Kamille Bidan. He wins. That is the part that makes it Gundam's most sophisticated tragedy rather than simply its saddest. Mobile Suit. Zeta Gundam ends with Kamille Bidan surviving the Grips conflict, defeating the series' primary antagonist Paptimus Sirocco in a direct confrontation, and emerging from the battle that kills dozens of named characters in its final episodes. He survives. He also loses everyone who mattered to him. His mother and father both die during the war. His father working for the enemy faction, his mother killed in an explosion that was itself a consequence of his own early decisions. 4. Murasame, the woman he loved, dies shielding him from the man who had spent the entire series killing everything Kamille cared about. Rosamia Badam, another cyber-Newtype he had adopted as a surrogate sister after she was conditioned to believe he was her brother, dies in circumstances where the damage to her mind was so complete that she died confused about who she was. Emma Sheen, his mentor and one of the series' most admirable characters, dies in the final battle. When Kamille kills Siroko's dying act is a deliberate psychic assault that dismantles Camille's mind, a final cruelty from a man whose entire existence was a demonstration of what power does to people who acquire it without conscience. Kamille survives as a vegetable. He cannot speak coherently. He cannot recognize people. The strongest new type in the universal century, the boy who carried the moral weight of an entire war, is left holding nothing because everything he was strong enough to protect the world from was not strong enough to protect him from the world. Tekkadan. The worst fate in Gundam history does not belong to a single person. It belongs to all of them together, because the point of iron-blooded orphans is not the tragedy of any individual child soldier, but the tragedy of the institution that produces them, and the institutional conclusion that the show reaches is total. Tekkadan begins as a group of orphaned boys who have been subjected to the Lalah Sune surgery, a procedure that grafts a spinal implant to the nervous system, connecting pilot to machine with precision that enhances combat effectiveness and reduces neurological resilience over time, shortening the lives of every boy who receives it. They are, in the precise language of the series, human debris, a classification that exists in the post-disaster era for people whose lives have so little institutional value that the descriptor is official. They seize the opportunity to become something else. They build Tekkadan. They fight their way from Mars to Earth and back, accumulating victories and losses, allies and enemies, and the deaths of everyone who cannot be protected by the organization they are building together. At the end, Gjallarhorn, the institutional power that has controlled the post-disaster world since the Calamity War, deploys a prohibited orbital bombardment weapon to annihilate Tekkadan's final stand rather than negotiate or accept their surrender. Mikazuki dies. Akihiro dies. Orga is already gone. The survivors are granted amnesty not as an act of mercy, but as an act of institutional calculation. Killing them all would generate too much sympathy. The history books that Gjallarhorn writes after the conflict mention Tekkadan only to describe what was done to them. They are not the heroes. They are not even the tragedy. They are a footnote in the story of a system that outlasted them, which was always the plan.